All right, we were recording.
All right, good evening. This is a meeting of the Community Preservation Committee, Wednesday, March 31st, 2021 at 7 p.m. It is a Zoom meeting, and in light of that, I will be reading a prepared script, if you will, to be read into the record, mostly concerning protection of the open meeting law. I'm Peter Pingator. I'm the chair of the CPC. I'll first confirm that each of the members of the committee can hear me. I'll announce your name in alphabetical order. We'll go in alphabetical order and respond in the affirmative, and I will do the same with respect to our staff. Starting with Paul Alpert. Paul Alpert.
Here.
Joe Barnes.
Here.
Artie Crocker.
Here.
Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
Chris Gersel.
Here.
Penny Kirk.
Here.
And Rick Zimbone.
Here.
Okay. And our staff, Karis Lustig.
Here.
And Kristen Wright.
Here.
Is Cecilia listening in? Is she on or she's listening in?
Here.
Okay. I see. All right. This is an open meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. It's being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of the public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. We are convening by Zoom app. You can log in pursuant to the instructions on the posted agenda on the town's website. Please note that the meeting is being recorded. Some attendees are participating by video conference. Please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and that take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast inadvertently or otherwise may be captured by the recording. The meeting materials that we have been provided to the committee. They're available on the town's website. It consists of the agenda, some draft motions, and prior minutes of meetings. We will have some other material that may be posted tonight as a public document on the screen so the public can see it. Public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. Let's turn to our first item. Here are the ground rules. I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members alphabetically, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions, and then hold until your name is called. Remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. Make sure that either I or you, whoever is speaking, has been identified for the record. Each vote will be taken by a roll call vote. Chairman's updates. We conferred with the Finance Committee. And I don't know that I'll save the details of it, if you will, for our next meeting. I kind of put that on the agenda for our next meeting, which is to discuss our conferences with both the select board and with each of the select board and the Finance Committee. There's nothing really controversial in my discussions with the Finance Committee. They seem generally supportive of our positions with respect to each of the articles. So there's not really any homework in the last couple of years. I would come back and ask questions. They would make requests of this committee for additional information. And there has been none, except for one there was one little piece of information that I needed to forward to one member, which is in part of our packet. I've made a mental note of that and I'll send it to him. But otherwise, no request for information and nothing controversial, generally supportive. All right, so now what we'll do is we're going to do the financial review. And what I think we should do is I will use as my guide what I usually put together for the presentation for the warrant article, which is 34. And I'll discuss with you the sources of funds for this year and how we arrive at those numbers, how they're appropriated to the various reserve accounts and general accounts, administration. We'll talk about fund balances after we do the appropriations, and then we can talk about the expenditures, if you will, that we're going to make to pay for the 8 items, and then the additional amount into the bucket. And so why don't we start by putting up, if you will, Kristen, the memorandum from our town manager, director of finance, assistant town manager, director of finance, Dave Davison, dated March 15th, 2021. And what I'll do is what I like is page 2. And then if we can zoom in, can we enlarge those first 2? There we go. All right, good enough. Great, fantastic. Okay, so as you folks know, we have 2 sources of revenue. The first source is the 2% surcharge. I'm speaking some generalities here, but it's a 2% surcharge annually on property taxes after the first $100,000 of valuation. In fiscal year 2022, and that is for the period 7/1/21 to 6/30/22, it's estimated that Needham will receive $2,974,000 in surcharge revenue. That's your first line under Community Preservation Fund revenue estimates. Okay. The second source of revenue is the Commonwealth match. That's a complicated formula having to do based on the number of communities participating, their respective local surcharges. The Commonwealth advises us going into town meeting what we should anticipate to be the percentage of the qualifying surcharge match. And what they have informed us is that that's similar to last year, 17.7% is the anticipated CPA match for fiscal year 2022. And if you arrive at then went through that calculation, the state trust fund distribution estimate is $502,285. The 17.7% is applied to the FY 2021's property tax surcharge. So actual money that was received in 2021 is multiplied by 17.7%. There's a little bit of finagling, if you will, estimating, but it's basically, the abatements are not counted. And then there's and I think it may be 0.99 instead of 1, but basically this is based on our property tax surcharge for fiscal year 2021. So you total those 2 numbers, and here's our revenue estimate, which is $3,476,285. Okay. That amount, we generally speaking, almost in every year but one, that money is estimated funds that are coming in during the course of the year. It is put into our reserve accounts and into our community. It's allocated to our community housing reserve, our historic resources reserve, our open space reserve, and our general reserve. And generally speaking, that money is not used to pay for any of the applications that are before us presently, generally speaking. And this is one of those years. So it's kind of easy. I can show you where the 3.476285 goes. And here's how it works. And then I'll work my way back and we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to pay for each of these separate warrant articles. So we have an obligation to deposit or appropriate in each of in 3 separate reserve accounts for community housing, historic resources, and open space, 10%. In order to ensure, because we're working with an estimate, in order to ensure that we actually meet the mandate, we usually deposit 11%. 11% for this year of that amount is $382,391. That amount will be deposited into open space. That amount will not be, you will not see that amount in the historic reserve. You'll see it in your second line there. You will not see it in the historic reserve because $382,000, $382,391 is less than the amount of the bond obligation that we have for payment of the bonds, a debt service for the restoration of Town Hall. And what we have done as a committee is made a determination that what we will first do is use all of the dollars that are designated for the reserve account for historic resources reserve, use all of those to pay off our debt service on the Town Hall bonds. And then, of course, if there's anything additional amount that's due, that's paid out of general reserves. You'll see that the amount paid, the bond obligation, I think this year is something like $400,000. So what we end up doing is depositing $382,391 to open space, and zero amount to historic resources reserve. And this year, with respect to community housing, we've made a policy determination as a committee to appropriate 22%, and that would be $764,783. So now if we can go to page 3 of this memo. Okay, you'll see Community Preservation Fund appropriation estimates without projects. Town Hall debt service, $405,041. Our obligations to the Rosemary Recreation Complex is $616,356. And administrative budget is $82,764. $764,783. Historic reserve, again, is zero. Open space reserve, 11%, is $382,391. Our general reserve is $1,225,714. And if you total those up, those in fact equal the amount of the appropriation, $3,476,285. The warrant article on 34 is pretty simple. It lists administration, $82,000, annual reserve, $1,225,714, community housing reserve, $764,783, and open space reserve, $382,391. It does not mention in Article 34 the debt service for Town Hall of $405,000 or the debt service for Rosemary Recreation of $616,000. Those amounts are paid as part of our budget article earlier in town meeting. And we kind of explained that when we actually walk through the article, but that's where the money is appropriated. So I guess, if you will, the only thing that's paid out of this year's appropriations are the debt obligations. Everything else that we're appropriating and paying for this or approving this year is coming out of either free cash or general reserve. So now, I think do we have a page on fund balances? So just bear with me for a minute. Yeah, let's go back to page 2. Okay. Here are our fund balances as of prior to the appropriation. See, this is where I wish that I could show you this, but here you can see what the fund balances are prior to the appropriation. After we appropriate these funds, the fund balance for community housing reserve, which is now roughly 2.5 million, we're going to appropriate basically another 3 million, excuse me, 700,000. The fund balance for the community housing reserve will be 3.2 million. I have a chart to show you this. Kristen, if the memo that I put together at page 5, do you think you could potentially put that up there and we could show what the fund balances are after we appropriate? It's a separate memo that I had sent as part of the email. Pardon me? Yeah,
Your
mine.
presentation?
Yeah. And it's page 5.
Yeah.
Peter,
Yes.
excuse me, it's Laura Dorfman. Before we go too far into this, may I ask a question of something you've already said?
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure I follow this. When you began talking about the allocations and early on and how we won't see one of the buckets of allocations because we're going to use those funds to pay the debt obligation on the bonds.
Yes.
I thought you first said you won't see it in open, you referenced open space first, but really, I think then it seemed like it was the historical bucket that we
Right.
wouldn't see that in.
So if that was the case, that was a misstatement by me and I apologize.
No, that's okay. So it's the historical bucket. We won't see that allocation of whatever the 11%. Is that correct?
Correct, because all of it is used, and I'll say it again because it's hard to understand. Because all of that money is used to pay for our bond obligation.
Got
and
it.
We pay bond obligations as part of the budget warrant article, which happens early on in town meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, it's if you have any other questions, and if I make it, please feel free to ask. All right, so Kristen, do we have that? Do we have that memo? So now I'm looking at page 5. Okay, there we go. All right, so in the end, with our appropriation, what you'll see is community housing is a good example. Our fund balance going into a town meeting, fund balance as of March 15th, 2021 was $2,459,763. We added our 22% of what was our estimated revenue for this upcoming year. And that's $764,783. And the total is in the far right, $224,546. The same goes with respect to open space. Open space is a good example of it's a little more nuanced. Look at our beginning balance is roughly $1.4 million. We are paying for the design funds for the sediment removal of Rosemary of the town reservoir, totaling $175,000 from this open space, from this reserve account. So we're going to have a withdrawal of $175,000. And then we're going to have a deposit of 11% of our estimated revenues for 2022 of $382,391. And then your total is in the far right, 1.649 million. Historic resources always seems to have a balance of $15,820. I don't know why. It's probably some sort of administrative reason, but we never have, we do not have any additions to it. And our expenditures, as I said, are done as part of the finance or the budget article. Our reserves is the reserve account is basically the net amount of the revenue after allocations. for each year. And that amount is $1,225,714. Now, what you should note is that this amount does not include what we have to spend currently before the fiscal year closes out, which is our FY 2021 CPA General Reserve and our CPA free cash. I'll get to that in a minute. That closes out, if you will, and then it's recertified and then becomes available for us to use later in the year, and it's available for us to use as part of our next town meeting. The one other note that I'd like to make is go back to the reserve balances as of March 15th on our other memo on page 2. And I want to make 2 notes about it. I just want to highlight. Can we have that, Kristen? Page 2 of the memo. Okay, so when you look at reserve balances as of March 15th, 2021, you can see what our community housing reserve is. It's the balance it was the beginning balance on the chart that you just saw. The same with historic resources reserve and the same with open space reserve. What this reserve account balances shows, though, is what's available to us presently from FY 2021 CPA General Reserve, roughly $800,000, and CPA free cash, roughly $2.6 million. Those amounts can be drawn from, and whatever balance is not spent down, they're closed out and they're recertified and then basically appear in our next funding cycle to be used. But what you're going to see when we go through this exercise is almost all of our warrant articles are going to be, with the exception of the sediment removal design project for the town reservoir, are going to be drawn from a source of funds from either general reserve or free cash. So now if we can go to page 3 of this memo. And there you have it. Okay, so we'll run through this quickly and then we'll review it again just when I give you updates or when we go through each of the individual proposals. So the Emery Grover project design funds, CPA amount $370,000. That will come from CPA free cash. The Fisher Trailhead project, $15,000. That will come from CPA FY21 General Reserve. The same goes for the Marriage Records Preservation Project of $25,000. The same with respect to McLeod Field renovation design. And the same with respect to the resurface of the synthetic track at DeFazio Field. All 4 of those will be drawn from, proposed source of funds for those will be the General Reserve. The historic common historic redesign project, and the initial request was $1,364,000. The town is going to be funding a part of and the balance of it of $1 million will be funded from CPA free cash. I think in the past, what we've done with town common, at least one other town common project, we did draw funds from open space, but I think that we were trying to, we can talk about that, but what we end up with is an open space balance of $1.6 million, which would appear to be a pretty healthy balance in case an opportunity arises to purchase a property, put a deposit on a property, and it kind of meets a little bit of the kind of back of the information or suggestion that we got through Artie concerning Conservation Commission's request. And I've already talked about the reservoir sediment removal. The initial request was $262,000. We're going to be funding $175,000 of it. That's coming from open space. Trail identification design will be coming from our general reserve. We have another warrant article that we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but that's Article 34. And what we're going to end up doing is we estimated what the revenue was going to be for fiscal year 2020, and we underestimated. And as a result of that, we have to go back into free cash in order to ensure that we've deposited a minimum of 10% for each of those fiscal years in each of community housing and open space and historic resources. But again, that $11,935 ends up getting used as partial payment for our bond obligation. That's a separate warrant article, and it's basically balancing the books because we're always operating on estimated revenues going forward when we make these appropriations to these reserve accounts. And if we get more money than we expect, we have to go back and make an adjustment. Dave points out that we've only had to do that twice. So this is the second time since we've had the program. I think that I would provide you, yes,
May I just ask for clarification?
yes.
The 11,935 will bring us up to 10% for fiscal year 2020 and not 11%.
You know, that's a good question, but I think that's what we tried to do, because remember, 11% is just to make sure that we clear the mandate.
Right.
And do I have that right, Karis? Rick?
Yeah,
So
Rick
I'll
is
just
on it.
clarify, because I did get some guidance from Stuart. It's a practice that we have in Needham. It's not legally required to true it up at the end, because every community has to make an estimate of what our revenues are going to be from the CPA trust fund annually. But our practice has been to true it up, and we're truing it up to the 10%. The 11% is what we put in case the estimate that we have is overly conservative and we need to add additional funds. So it's being trued up to the 10%.
Okay, I thought that we could provide, when we go through each of the proposals, I could provide a finance update on each one of them. There are 3 or 4 of them that I can go into greater detail, but I don't know that it makes sense for us to say, here's the story with them, or here's the update, financial update for Emery Grover. If you want me to do it that way, I will. But I thought that I would save that, and I don't know that it's necessarily a requirement for right now, but it does clarify. Sorry, it does clarify some of the questions that you may have with respect to this chart in front of you. So,
Mr. Chair, it seems that Mr. Zimbon has a question.
I know, I was going to ask Rick. Okay, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And my question kind of relates to, I believe, what you were just referring to. Like, for example, if you look at this page and you look at the reservoir sediment removal, we're funding 175,000. If I'm assuming the other 87,000 that's not being funded by us has a funding source that will be identified on the warrant in the article?
It does. And so, you know what? I'm going to do that now. Okay. And so, because it makes sense to do it now. Okay. So there are a handful of them. So let's start. Starting with the first, Emery Grover. The initial request was for roughly $1.4 million. We agreed to fund $370,000. There will be a warrant article for funding $1.105 million, the balance in design funds. It will come from the general fund. It would be a general fund debt authorization, and it will be the subject of a warrant article in our special town meeting. So that amount, so the question of the design funds for the Emery Grover project, where where the proponents have taken the position that the full amount of design funds is $1,475,000. There are two sources of funding for it. One is from general fund debt authorization, and the other is from CPA free cash. Okay. The next item, McLeod Field, we were quibbling, if you will, over the $3,000 or $4,000 to design the 48-inch drain pipe. And that money, I think, is basically going to come out of, let me get the language right. It will be paid from general funds. Okay. Walker Pond, that's going to be the subject of a separate article in our special town meeting for the full amount of the request that was made before us for $125,000. And that they will be requesting funding from free cash, not CPA free cash. Okay. The Town Reservoir, $175,000. The initial request was for $262,000. We agreed to fund $175,000. The balance, $87,000, will be the subject of a special warrant article, special town meeting, and it will be funded from free cash.
Peter,
Yes.
the Walker Pond thing says 175,000. Excuse me, instead of 125.
Okay. That's a good point. Let's see if the numbers still add up. I guess we don't know that. Hold on for a minute. Let's see if the spreadsheet is right. Good catch. Oh, you know what? It kind of doesn't matter, right? But I see that that's an error. The reason why it doesn't, probably the reason why I wasn't caught is because those weren't the numbers that were actually running through the calculations and the appropriations. But I'll make a note of that. We'll talk to Dave about that. Can we do that, Karis? I don't think it matters. Because basically it's taken off the table. Okay, so I guess those would be updates on the financial side, where we as a committee took a position where we weren't going to fund the full amount of the request. We basically have gotten responses, and which basically is showing that there's going to be other sources of revenue to fully fund the project. Rick, do you have any other questions related to that?
Peter, it's Laura. May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So if there are funds that if there are projects that we are not going to fully fund, is there always going to be a separate article for that other funding source? We were trying to figure that out and trying to remember how we dealt with that. We dealt that way with Memorial Building. So let's use that as the model. Karis has the answer. She answered it last week and I still can't remember.
So no, they're all in one article. So basically the article is still put on the warrant by the CPA, but the funding sources are mixed. So it'll say to raise, $262,000, $175,000 will come from the bucket that we determine it comes from, and then the balance will be coming from the general fund. So it's all one article. The project gets approved as one project.
And so we, members of the CPC, representatives of the CPC will make a presentation, and the select board will make a presentation as well. Okay. Any other
Thank you.
question? No, it's a good question.
Peter, I
Now-
couldn't get my unmuted to unmute.
Okay.
So, but fine, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So that's that is our update. And if you have, I guess I'll just say this, if you have any additional questions or think about it, let me know. And so we could potentially get those answers by Dave, by email, and share them at our next meeting. Okay.
Peter, will we have a copy of this, or should we already have had a copy of this? I'm not sure.
So we did, yes, you can have a copy of it, absolutely. And it was for discussion purposes, and so it was never, so yes, you should.
Is this the March 15th document, Peter?
It is.
Yeah, that was sent around earlier. I can put together a packet for the meeting on the 7th with everything kind of together, if that would be helpful.
That would be with Peter's memo as well.
Yeah, just with everything, the article, just all the data in one
Okay.
place, so you're not going through.
Thank you. Sorry, I
So
missed
I guess,
that.
let me add one last thing. Let me do one last exercise, okay, before I leave, just so you can get a sense of how our financial modeling and how it's come about. So Kristen, can you go to attachment C, page 1 of the March 15th memo? And it's gonna, I don't know if you could rotate the picture. Let's see, attachment C. There we go. Now, can we rotate that?
Just move your computer, Peter.
Yeah. That's not it. That's go to view. Rotate view, top one. Okay. Okay, so you're just going to have to recall, if you will. So we haven't, I don't have the spreadsheet in front of me, but what this represents is a projection of what our debt service would look like if we funded Emory Grover as we had proposed, which is a total of $6 million. And what I want you to focus in on is look at 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, okay? So you can see that the unused balance for 2025 is roughly $1.4 million. The Emory Grover debt service would be $700,000. So that means we have $700,000 after Emory Grover. And after, this is also after we make our required reserve account appropriations and before we get any state match, because we don't use estimates of what the state may give us in terms of calculating what we could bond. In order to calculate what you can bond, you have to control the funding mechanism. We can control the 2%. We don't control the match from the state. So you can't get a bond. You can't get any funding based on a hope and a promise, okay? So what we have here, though, is what we see is we have $700,000 available to us after we pay all of our bond obligations, including Emory Grover, but before we have our allocation from the state. Under our prior financial model, when we were funding $12.6 million, if you looked at 2025 and 2026, basically, the unused balance was something like $1.4 or $1.5 million. And the Emory Grover obligation almost matched it, basically. You know, we had a year where it was just basically the same. Emory Grover was the unused unused allowance was 1.4. Emory Grover obligation was 1.4 if we were funding roughly $12.6 million. And so I want to show to you what the model looks like if we throttle back our obligation on Emery Grover, and this model actually includes for this year, Dave did 5 years out, so 2022, 23, 24, 25, and 26. He allocates 22% to the reserve account for community housing. So the model that you see in front of you is, this is what it looks like if our obligation to Emery Grover is 6 million. This is what it looks like if we are funding community housing at 22%. Prior to the match from the state, we still have $700,000 of headroom, if you will, that goes into the general reserve for all of the other requests that may come before us. Does that kind of a fair representation, Karis? Okay. So that's it. That's my comment. If you have any comments or questions, any? No. Okay.
Yeah, Peter.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not running the calculations. I'm not running the numbers, but I'm seeing in the far left column, we have the surcharge amount, which for 2022 is the amount that you told us, the 2,974. We have that number. And then under debt service allowance, he's got 70%. Now the 70% makes sense because it's the 30% that the statute requires, but we're adding another 10%. So shouldn't we be calculating it off of 60% instead of that 70%? Because we're adding more, and basically another 10% to the housing allowance.
Maybe, except that
I mean, I'm assuming that that's where the 70%, why the 70% is there.
it probably is, although he probably has flexibility on that because it can't be more than that, because we know that 30% of it has to go to other places. But it's discretionary essentially on our part to allocate the additional 11%. So they probably can continue to borrow against it because it's a discretionary allocation by us on a year-by-year basis. We're not mandated by law to provide 22% in community housing.
Okay, so
That's probably why he's doing it that way.
So basically, when we get over to the far right where it says unused allowance, we have to remember that if we're continuing to fund the extra 10 or 11% for the housing bucket, that number is going to go down.
No, I'm telling you that I see, you know what, that's a good point. Let's see how he does that. I thought that he had actually allocated that. I feel pretty confident that he had.
Basically, the unused allowance is what we have to spend on other things.
Plus the match. Yes.
Plus the match, right.
Yeah. All right.
The unused allowance is what we have from our 2%.
Correct. All right. So why don't we
spend on other things?
Let's park that that's a good question for Dave. So let's put that in our parking lot of questions for Dave. Okay. Kristen, can you do that with your other right hand to kind of keep track of other additional questions for Dave?
I certainly can. I was trying to see quickly if this year perhaps it was 70% and next year it was 60. But the unused allowance, that's unused debt service allowance. So if you take debt service allowance column and add or subtract the current debt service, which is the 5th column, that equals the unused allowance. If that makes any more sense. So if you take this column, my fault. If you take this column here and subtract this column here, you get this column.
Right.
So I was trying to quickly see if 23 might have had the 60%. But yes, I can definitely ask that to Dave.
Okay. So that because what I was saying was, I was actually saying, well, this calculation includes the 22%. So, and Paul's saying maybe not. So let's just get clarification for that. Okay, from that. All right, good catch, Paul.
I tried.
That's good. All right, any other questions for me or for Dave? No? Okay. All right, so then we'll go through our we'll do a quick round on updates for Emery Grover. And or for each of the applications, we'll start with Emery Grover 2201. I gave you my update, which is that there's a funding source for the balance of the design funds. And as I said, the finance committee was, I don't know what their position is on this. I guess it's okay if I say this. My hunch is that I think that they're really taking a position that there's a lot of requests on capital projects from the school committee that have nothing to do with the lane that we're in. And so there's things that are happening with other committees and questions being raised by other committees, which may affect if the finance committee supports this article. In my mind, we've kind of done our job and staying in our lane, analyzing what we can do and are willing to do. I'll add that I think that there will be a serious effort on the part of the town to determine how they will be able to fund the construction portion of the project. So that will be, they will likely have a position on that going into town meeting.
Would you like me to stop sharing the screen?
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just to address that particular article.
Okay.
As we're deliberating this next week, I would suggest that we suspend our vote until someone gets back to us to make sure that they have a funding source for the construction. If they're looking for 24 million and we've committed I'm using ballpark numbers, we've committed roughly 6. They have to come up with 18 or 20 million more. And the question becomes, where is that going to come from? And that was kind of the question and the point that the finance committee was making when they said, we have to look at the total capital picture. And I think they were trying to identify funding sources for the Emery Grover in light of all of the other projects that the schools had on their capital forecast or their school needs plan. And so as you're looking at that, I think that I would propose that we take a position, and this is for discussion really next week, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but just to think about that we wait until that funding source for construction is identified before we finally commit to this particular article.
Well, my concern with that position is that there's another funding source for basically for 3/4 of the proposal.
For this project, not for
Yeah, for this project.
Yeah.
And I think it would be an odd place for us to be as a committee to not vote. I think we're kind of getting out of our lane, if you will. I understand that we should be concerned about, are you going to build it? And we don't want to spend our design funds until we know how you're going to fund the building. I think it would be, I think that, I would say that I would be so shocked if the select board would be requesting $1 million for design funds if they didn't know how they were going to come up with the 27 million for the 27 million. So I think that that's going to happen. but I guess, I don't know how to say this, but I wouldn't, well, I think it's great. We should get that information. We should get, it's one of those things where if I were doing a deal, I would say, I think we need some comfort level that we're actually going to have a mechanism for funding the construction. But I don't think that it has to be some sort of condition preceding to us taking a vote or voting on it. I don't want to be in a position, I would feel very uncomfortable as a committee if we know that we're committed to trying to preserve the building. There's a plan in place to potentially preserve the building. And that we're only offering 25% of the funding source for the design component of it and the construction component of it. And the 75% of the design portion of it is they're ready to fund it. And I think I think that they're not going to make that proposal unless they know where the balance of it is going to come from. So I think we can have that kind of discussion. I don't think that we should defer our vote on that. I think that we should have a continued discussion about that up to the time of town meeting. I mean, I understand your concern. I really do. But at the same time, I don't know that I don't know. I guess I think that we should find out as much information as we can, but I don't know that we should we should not vote until we have some assurance that we're going to be funding for construction. I mean, I think we'd want to know that information. I guess the question is how much information do we have to feel comfortable with? And it's good to have, I think it's good to have this discussion now because we're going to vote next week.
All right, so Mr. Chair, just to offer a different viewpoint, I don't believe we're under any requirement to vote every article next week. My point is that I'm suggesting, just so that I'm clear, I'm suggesting that we suspend the vote on that article. We can vote right up until the time we convene town meeting in May. So what I'm suggesting is that we not take that vote and we just hold it in abeyance. I don't know, and I don't think anybody does. I think they're still discussing, the longer term plan.
Oh, I know they're still discussing. I know that they need to have a financial model to come up with it. I know that they don't have the answer right now as we're discussing it.
Yeah, so that's all I'm suggesting is, and I'm not suggesting not to vote. I'm just suggesting that there's no sense of urgency that we have to vote next week on this particular article.
Okay, let's continue with that discussion. Let's hear from Mr. Alpert and then Joe Barnes. Paul, did I have that right? Joe, was your hand up first?
No, go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. This discussion is raising procedural questions for me. And so I'm going to disagree with Rick on procedural grounds, I think, but I think we have to go back to the town manager and probably the moderator for the problems that I'm going to raise. So the first procedural issue is that the town manager needs to know what's going into the warrant because they have to print the warrant. And that's a reason why we have to have a vote to say to the town manager and the warrant committee, this is what we voted, go ahead and print the warrant. And I don't know what their timing is on that, whether they need that by next week. They very well may, because we're getting close. Now, the other procedural issue that I have is the question of those things that are being split between us and general funds. I question whether it's a problem to have them both on our warrant article instead of splitting them. And the reason I raise this is because there's a provision in the Community Preservation Act that says that there cannot be amendments to CPC articles. We present them to town meeting and town meeting votes it up or down. They cannot amend. Town meeting cannot make recommendations to amend. It raises the question to me, if if it's a CPC article, and especially for Emery Grover, it sounds like Finance Committee is going to generate discussion at town meeting, that there's going to be a lively discussion about Emery Grover. And if some town meeting members, or maybe even the Finance Committee, wants to make amendments to the non-CPC side of the funding, then are they going to be allowed to do that? That's why I'm saying that's a question for perhaps for the moderator.
All right, we've dealt with that procedurally in the past, but Kristen's got her hand up on that. Here's the answer for that.
Yes, I have tapped my lifeline. So to answer Paul's first question, the articles will still be printed in the warrant. It just will not reflect the CPC's vote. However, FinCom will probably not set their vote until CPC has said their vote.
That's right.
So on CPC articles. So FinCom probably will not vote. I won't speak for them outright, but it's likely that if we don't vote, or if CPC doesn't vote, you guys don't vote on the articles, then FinCom will probably also not provide their vote that will be within the warrant article. That's the first one. The sooner the better is always the answer with when we vote. And I will just throw out there that the presentations that we'll be doing for town meeting, as we did in October, those need to be recorded and uploaded no later than the 21st of April, which I believe is the next CPC meeting after the 7th. So your recorded videos need to be done potentially the same night or before the vote would happen if it was on the 21st, just as a procedural
Good.
note. The second thing about the split funding, town meeting cannot amend or request to amend the CPC portion of the article, but they can discuss and ask to amend the town's portion. And I don't know what the result of that would be if they reduced it. But that they can't amend the CPC part, but they could discuss, I believe, amending the.
Okay, so it doesn't go to the entire article, it just goes to the CPC funding.
To my understanding.
I think what we should do is anticipate taking a vote. We should need to get some additional information, as much information as we can between now and the time that we vote in our next meeting. And I guess there's nothing that precludes us from having a meeting before the 21st. I mean, we have April 7th meeting. We could have a meeting on April 14th, right? Potentially, okay? So that's another way of handling it.
So let me raise a scenario, Kristen, on that. Let's say for Emery Grover, we get somebody like Paul Siegenthaler, who stands up and says, I don't think any of this should be funded by CPC because we're voting design funds. We don't know that CPC is going to pay for the project. It should come out 100% from the general funds. So we cannot amend the CPC portion. So we have a CPC article that says 370,000 is being voted. And the recommendation that's being made is that 0 comes from CPC, and they want to increase, they want to do an amendment to increase the non-CPC fund up to, the full amount, $1.4 million. How do they do that and then vote down the CPC fund? Because we have a vote on the entire article. So you either vote yes or no on the entire article, and you can't vote no on the CPC fund because you've increased the amount of the general fund to $1.4 million.
Why can't you just change the funding source? The warrant article, what the warrant article expressly states what the funding source is.
Because you would in effect be amending the CPC side.
No, you vote down to the CPC and you amend.
Well, you're splitting your vote on a warrant article.
Okay. All right.
Can,
You know what?
do that.
Okay. Well, all right. So that's
a question. Can you do that?
all right. So let's deal with that. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin?
Well, no, I'm saying I think that's a serious question that has to go to the moderator to resolve sooner rather than later.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, that's a good question. We'll ask the moderator. I don't think he's going to be hard pressed to say, we've already given a sense of the committee that we're prepared to fund $5 million of the Embry Grover construction. So there's really no, and it's in our financial projections. So there's really, there's no Siegenthaler objection.
There's always the
Just-
possibility of a Siegenthaler.
Okay, I just want to let you know that. All right.
I know.
But you raise a different point, which is it's you could find yourself in a position where people are voting down CPC out of principle, whatever it is, and then they want to increase the design funds through another source. So, okay, all right. So that's, I guess, what we've got. That's a good question. We'll talk to the moderator about that. Because it is challenging when you have two different funding sources and two different voting right. The voting rights are very different for each funding source. It's an odd one. Okay, Joe Barnes, you had your hand up. You have any comments?
Well, I had it up. I took it down. I thought that Rick's request was a reasonable one. And whatever information we can get prior to the vote would certainly be reasonable in my mind. I don't think the Dave Davison or the powers that be need to get into a lot of detail, but just an assurance that they have a funding source and we can move ahead comfortably. A little more information than that might be wise, but I think it's important that we don't simply walk in blindly and feel as though that we don't have support from the other side. So
Okay, that's a good point. It's another way of expressing what Rick is saying. We really need to increase our comfort level that there's going to be some funding for the construction. Fair enough. Fair representation for you and for Rick.
Yep.
I have a
Rick?
question, Peter.
Rick.
Oh.
Yep. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Or
My question was, if this is a thing, that's could potentially be something down the road, can the article be rewritten to say it's predicated upon an adequate funding source to complete the project?
I don't know.
That would kind of
can't-
cover us if we.
I know, but we really can't do that because that's kind of contrary to principles of town finance. Because your $5 million is going to be bonded, and you can't, in order to get to the place where you need to spend, or your $27 million is going to be bonded, and in order to get to the space where you can actually get the money and bond it, you have to spend down in your design funds. I don't know that. I think that's kind of runs contrary to principles of town finance, but I'm not an expert, as I've reflected this evening.
I'm just thinking, and I have my banker hat on, so
Yeah, sure.
I know the
Yeah.
rules are different. I just.
Yeah, you want to put in
throw that
all
out.
sorts of conditions proceeding. Maybe you should have some reps and
Right.
warranties too.
Exactly. We'll get a
Okay.
lawyer, do it all.
Get an opinion letter. Okay. Paul will tell you they're very expensive. Okay.
Only if you're using my firm.
Okay. Let's go. All right. So are we okay? We feel so really coming out of this is we need to have some comfort level of and assurances about how the town is going to fund construction. Fair enough?
Yep.
Rick, does that meet Rick?
Yeah, I unmuted so I could chime in. Yeah, and I think after we were at the finance committee spent a considerable amount of time, and if you want to learn more, you can go back and check the tapes, and watch it and get totally bored. But they basically discussed all of the capital needs that the town has coming up, and that included, some of the projects that are already there that are still required to be funded. It included a number of projects that are on the docket as far as schools are concerned, and so on and so forth. And the bottom line is they look at the debt cost. It's very similar to what we did on ours when we first took a look at how much debt we were committed to. they're concerned about the debt cost associated with all these articles. And now they're starting, and there's a movement, a question about, how will this town support another override? And is that the way we want to do it? And so they're getting into much bigger issues. And this particular project happens to be the driving force for that. And
Well,
so,
And that actually was even more particular to the schools. The Needham schools had huge, very large capital need and capital requests going forward. So this is, you get down to, wait a minute, you're talking to us about funding the administration building. What about all these other additional buildings and other projects that you have? We need to have a discussion even within our school budget of what we're going to do. So the
point though is, and one of the reasons I think we need additional clarification, and I appreciate Joe Barnes's comment. But if you remember, we got a question at the Finance Committee about what would happen if we delayed the work on Emery Grover. In other words, what if we temporarily moved the school department, and rather than just some time during construction where they'd be at the Hillside location, what if they were there longer than that? And what if we were to delay the construction on Emery Grover? Why does it have to be done right now? And that's one of the items that they wanted to know what impact it would have on us. And they're looking at it from what impact would it have on the town's debt cost going forward. And I think that's what they're maybe coming back to. And I don't know this for a fact, but I'm just surmising that they're looking at it and saying, okay, we have a place for the administration. It's Hillside School. There's nothing, we don't have a pressing need. As we look to some of these other projects, maybe we're better off delaying Emery Grover until such time as the town can support it. Again, I'm surmising. I don't have any direct information.
Right, and you're right, that's useful information to have, but again, it shouldn't really be part of our deliberation because we got to stay in our lane, right? But I understand your point. Okay, all right.
We need to get the answers, is my point.
Okay, all right, Kristen.
I just want to make sure I'm getting the information correctly. So the concern of the committee is that about voting on the design portion of this project is the commitment level for the future construction portion of the project that will come at a later date.
Correct.
Is that accurate? Okay.
That's absolutely it. That's our lane. Okay, we can talk about do we have some comfort level for construction funds being available, because we're only in it for 25%. Where's the other 75% coming from? Okay, I think are we done? Let's move on to preservation of Town of Needham marriage records. I have nothing to add. That's mine. Town Common Historic Redesign and Beautification. Chris Gersel.
Yes. No update at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and so the financial update on that is, although the request was for $1.3 million, the town out of general funds is going to pay for $344,000 of it. And the funding source for the balance of $1 million will come from CPC funds. Okay. All right.
May I ask, because the last I heard, we were funding the whole thing. How did that come about?
I just read it in a memo, and then I asked, and I figured, I don't know that I need to press this too much, right? I kind of like it.
I'm just curious as to
I think that
step up on that.
But I think that the town felt like, and I think that it may very well be the result of, and I think that of our expressions of concern that we were carrying too much of the capital load for some of these projects, that this should be appropriately part of the town's obligation. It should be part of their budget. And I think that's what I heard. Okay. But I didn't want to press it too hard, because I kind of liked it you know,
Well, it's good
Right.
to know that they're listening to us.
okay. Okay, Kristen, do you think that, did you have any information to offer on that? Because that's kind of what I heard from Karish.
It's in the memo that Dave provided, and he's the man that controls the money, so.
Okay, so he doesn't offer, he offers no reason.
I was skimming it to see if it was in this memo as a detailed item, but
It's in the memo. He just doesn't say why. That's, it's.
I was trying to see if
okay.
there was a why. I don't see a why.
I didn't want to press him too much on that. Okay. Fisher Trailhead.
Updates,
Okay.
pretty simple.
Synthetic track, resurface synthetic track. I assume no updates.
No updates.
McLeod Field renovation. I assume no updates. No updates, okay. And our trail identification, professional design services, I have no updates. Town reservoir sediment removal, the update I've already provided you was a financial update. Okay, Paul, do you have anything else?
No, I've got nothing else. I didn't realize that we had decided on the 170,000, which is roughly 2/3, which is fine. I've got no problem with it. I just didn't know that we had decided on that.
Well, we haven't, you know, but that came out of the sense of the committee, and it was an easy point to, so we haven't voted,
Yep.
but it was an easy point to say, that's our responsibility. The water's edge was
Makes
our
sense to me.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
But
it
again-
makes eminent sense to me.
And also, I want to say this too, because I want to make this clear. When we were talking about the sense of the committee with respect to Emery Grover, remember, we were trying to get a stake in the ground so that we could build a financial model and see where we would be if we had this obligation. How does it look? That's why I went back and said, this is, if we have this as our debt service, this is how it changes things. But we have not voted. There's at least one member of this committee who would appropriate more money than $6 million. There are a couple of members of this committee who would appropriate, just in the sense of the committee, fewer than $6 million. And one member of the committee wasn't present at the time. So we're going to have a full and robust discussion about that. And when we eventually have a vote, which is a year from now, presumably a year from now. But I just don't want people to think that we've already negotiated this point. It's already in place. It may very well be that the school committee comes back and asks us for more money. It may be, you know, but we've kind of told them basically what we think would work. But I don't, for those member, I'm pointing to one, for that one member who basically says, I really want this building to be preserved, and he's entitled to make his argument and make his case to us that we could fund more, whatever, some incremental amount more. Likewise, there are people on this committee who should be able to make their case to us that we should be funding less, incrementally less. Okay, I just want to emphasize that. Does that make sense to everybody? Because we haven't taken the vote. I just don't want you to feel like this is a done and you can't say anything about it. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay, all right, got it. All right, so, okay, then increase affordable housing bucket contribution. Rick, any? No, we have, what you want to give, you were in the FinCom meeting. Do you want to give your feeling? Because I thought, you know, during our public hearing, we had a little bit of pushback by a former member of FinCom. And I had anticipated that might be, kind of an expression, kind of an opinion that some other members of the FinCom, current ones, might share. But I didn't get that sense at all, one way or the other. But, Rick.
Yeah, Artie was there as well. I didn't sense any pushback at all. And, I mean, I didn't see any objection. I just, I think, as you indicated at the meeting, you kind of wish you had the slide that the Housing Authority had put together for our public hearing, those slides. And so, but I think that, they're gonna, the Housing Authority is gonna want to talk. I think there was definitely, I'd have to say, Jim Healy provided accolades after accolades on Peter, our chair, for his forward thinking and his, I mean, it was like a love fest, excuse me. But I mean, I don't know about you, Artie, but that's the way I viewed it.
I pointed out that there was another working group. I didn't,
I'm not looking for any
I,
glory,
and also-
Peter, but
Yeah,
it
and I
Can get
also-
clarity
I did-
on this, Rick. Is Peter getting all the glory for the
It's
work
a-
that you've done?
no, I just think Jim Healy and he, I mean, they're bros. They really are.
I thought they were in the same room. It was so.
okay,
It was unbelievable.
all right, we're gonna stop this now. All right, I,
Yeah, actually, Peter, yes, I mean, if any, there was no I've sensed zero objections. If anything, it was almost the opposite as far as what we're looking to do, what, what Rick came up with, what we're looking to do with the committee. It was almost the opposite. As far as, yes, please do it and please do more type of thing. That's what I got. That's what I walked away with.
I just want to clarify. I mean, I would, if Rick, if you want me to tell everyone that this was your idea, I'm
No.
fine with that. I
No,
totally am. But I thought that I was actually,
You did. At the meeting, you did
you
say.
said that. I have
Oh, I
no
did?
problem with that.
You
Yeah,
did.
you
I did.
said that.
Yes, you
did.
I'm not looking for that. I was just fascinated by the relationship you and Jim, the bond that you guys have developed since Memorial Park building. I just think it's unbelievable.
Okay, now I'm sensing sarcasm.
okay.
Mr.
No,
Chair-
it's good. It
Joe
was a
Byron
good,
has his hand raised.
Chair,
yes, Joe.
yeah, just quickly, I think on a serious note, the fact that Jim Healy is very supportive of the work that we, you, all of us have done is not a bad thing. And carrying that forward, I think it goes a long way to helping us at town meeting. So, well done.
Thank you. And I think that I think that this committee is working really hard. We're doing really good work. This is a good committee. Okay. You guys everyone is doing a good job. And so I think that that's reflected in our communications to them. And so that's all of us. That's not me. That's all of us, everybody. So, we're good. We're a good committee. Everybody knows that. It's not me. It's all you. Okay. Even you, Paul.
And now we have that on this recording.
Okay.
That's a George Costanza thing. It's not me, it's you.
Okay. All right, Artie, any other reflections on Finance Committee?
No, the getting back in it related to town meeting. Obviously, we have to come in well prepared with every single article, no matter what we think of how it's going to be received. But at town meeting, we know how. I believe we all know how it was received when we were looking to put some money towards helping with some of the rental assistance. And the impression I get is there's a lot of empathy in town in this direction. So that's the impression I get, at least. That's all.
Is Rick, did we lose Rick?
It appears we did.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now we've exhausted our discussion for reviewing the application. Let's move on to approving the minutes. First one is for March 3rd of the minutes of our March 3rd, 2021 meeting. Can I have a motion approving those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, so the motion is made by Joe Barnes and it is seconded by Artie Crocker. And we'll have our roll call vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Joe Barnes.
Aye.
Artie Crocker.
Aye.
Bob Dermody.
Aye.
Laura Dorfman.
Aye.
Chris Kursel.
Aye.
Penny Kirk. Penny, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Aye.
That's okay. Okay, and all right, so we're gonna have Rick is abstaining, I guess, right? He's probably got tech problems. Let me see if I have a text from him.
I think it's more user error.
Poor guy.
Ouch.
He gave me his proxy.
There he
There he
is.
goes.
Okay, good. Great, it's perfect.
You want to say that again, Chris?
I think Rick is a stand-up citizen. And they have a statue or field after him.
Rick, can you hear us?
I just heard Chris's wonderful comment, and I thank him for it. For
Actually-
some reason, my computer crashed.
Yep, Rick, actually, he was just repeating what Jim Healy had said to you in the coffee shop today.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay, all right, so we're voting on the approval of the minutes of our meeting for March 2nd. And the vote, are you in favor, Rick?
Yes, sir.
Good. And chair votes yes. Okay. Our next vote is for approval of the minutes of our March 17th, 2021 meeting.
I
Can have a
move to
motion?
approve.
Okay, so that's Penny Kirk who's made the motion.
Second.
Second by Chris Gersel, and we'll have a roll call vote. Paul Alpert.
Aye.
Joe Barnes.
Aye.
Artie Crocker.
Aye.
Bob Dermody.
Aye.
Laura Dorfman.
I,
Chris Gersel.
Aye.
Penny Kirk.
Aye.
And Rick Zimbo.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. All right, let's see. That is it. Our next meeting is April 7th, and
Kristen has her
we
hand
will,
up.
Hand up.
Kristen.
Kristen.
Mr. Chair, I just want to mention again about the recorded things. Those are not on this agenda. It came out, the memo from the town manager came out after this agenda was posted. So the recordings from this committee for the articles of the CPC are due by April 21st. Cindy Roy Gonzalez is the tech help on that. She's the same person that helped in October. And so if anybody has questions, once we determine who will be making the presentations, it's going to be Cindy. But if it's voted on either the 7th or the 14th, it would be a quick turnaround to get those videos recorded. And if you want to reach out to your proponents, those would be, you'd have to do that as well as the liaisons.
Okay, so we got a deadline of April 21st to upload your recordings, okay? Penny Kirk, question.
This is pure technicality, but because Rick disappeared, I think you forgot to say aye on the first
Oh, Rick,
vote.
Rick.
No, Rick said aye, but
Oh,
you didn't.
oh, thanks, Penny. Okay, chair votes aye. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
just a quick shout out to our very able recorder. She continues to not miss a beat, doesn't miss a breath.
that's right. She does it.
So I don't know how she does it. Great job, Kristen. Thank you.
Yeah, really great
We'll
job.
put her statue next to
Second.
Rick's.
Okay,
Are we gonna get procedures? Is that gonna come out as far as how to go about doing the recordings and stuff again?
Yes.
Thank you.
all right, so let's deal with this, though. We had draft proposed motions, and then Paul had sent a red line. I don't know that we need to go through these right now, Paul.
No, it's.
And also, it's actually kind of a drafting question that I actually kind of have for Krista, because I think that we got into trouble one year for the language that we used in our motions, and we had to fix it.
It was just
Whatever.
last year because of the timing,
It's
because
just timing.
yeah,
Okay,
usually it's a certain way, but because the funds hadn't been certified because of COVID, because of October. Yeah, so these have been blessed by Dave as well. So these should be in good working order.
Okay.
And I mean, you can review them if you'd like. I can ask Karis to send the red lines around, but it's the language to use when you move in a vote to vote either way, or you can amend it, of course, to say, I don't want to fund this.
okay. I could do an offline conversation with Paul, because he had some suggested language, but it's.
Yeah,
Well, and some of you picked at some nits, you cleaned it, you changed the language a little bit, which is for the better, but some of the stuff maybe is just a style that the town wants to use. We'll figure that out, right? Okay,
that's fine.
okay.
I'm
Okay,
just making suggestions, Peter.
yeah, no, it's great. Good, I was glad you looked at it more closely. Okay, all right, so our next meeting is April 7th. We got our warnings from Kristen, and now let's have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, so that was, I'm sorry, Bob Dermody made the motion, and
Chris Gersel seconded.
Chris Gersel seconded. Okay, roll call vote, Paul Alpert,
Aye.
Joe Barnes,
Aye.
Artie Crocker,
Aye.
Bob Dermody,
Aye.
Laura Dorfman,
I.
Chris Gersel,
Aye.
Penny Kirk,
Aye.
Rick Zimbo,
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Okay, everyone. So we will get some more information on funding for Emory Grover between now and the 7th. Okay.